How powerful is Cox Fiber? Powerful enough to keep fans across the country in the action on the biggest game days of the year. Whether you're one of 65,000 fans at Allegiant Stadium or you're streaming the game at home with Cox Fiber from the company with America's fastest download speeds, whenever it matters most, Cox keeps you connected. Limited availability in select areas. Speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms and other restrictions may apply. Analysis by Ookla of Speed Test Intelligence data. Fixed median download speeds. U.S. Q3 2023.
Here's Jeff Gueldner, who's good company.
Keep the music playing.
From the Jayhawks television network. Hey, Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you guys doing?
We're hanging in there. So
all right.
I mentioned before we went to break, this Big 12 is crazy. Kansas at 5-3. Houston, which is starting to flex some muscle. And I guess if there are teams that you would look at as being potentially those who could maybe stake a claim, it would be Houston and Kansas. And coincidentally, they play on Saturday.
Yep.
So what do you make of the Big 12 so far?
Well, parity probably doesn't quite do it justice. I also think it's a little bit early in the way that the schedule works out as far as who plays whom and who has to play them twice. I think that's going to play a big role in all of this. It's a tough conference. It's a deep conference. I don't know that you could say that there is a clear-cut favorite, but you're right. I mean, Houston is one of those teams, preseason, top 5, top 10, depending on which poll. They've got real men on that team, and recent history shows that Kelvin Sampson gets them to play hard. So it's not going to be easy, but it never is.
So it seems like kind of in the NBA, and when you get to February, you pretty much are what you are. It's really hard to move up or down in the standings. I'm just using that as a reference point. Do you think that could be similar in the Big 12, or do you think we'll see a lot of movement over this last month and a half or so, or do you feel like we have kind of a separation line? We know who's good and who's not good.
Well, I think there's a separation line, and I haven't looked at today's standings, but the last time we were on air, I think once you get kind of below Baylor, you're probably not going to win the conference. But just because you're not probably going to win the conference doesn't mean you can't play a major role in who does. Now, that being said, there's about 6 or 7 teams that are at Baylor's level or above record-wise. And not to mention you've got the TCUs and some of the teams that are just below that in Texas that are very capable. I think what you're going to see is the ongoing carnage of who you play and where, and you better show up that night. And it's also, not to overly simplify, it's a make-or-miss sport. We've watched the Jayhawks turn some 20% shooters into 50% shooters, and we've also seen it go the other way. And any given night, you're not really sure what's going to happen. But, I think the cream is definitely up there. There are some surprising teams as well. And it's really going to come down, I think, to, the schedule. And obviously the Jayhawks is very heavily backloaded, if you will.
Jeff Gueldner is our guest. We're talking KU basketball. He's part of their television network. So we all know the blue bloods in college basketball. We've always known that Kansas is one of those. I don't know if this is a good question or not, but in this new day and age of transfer portal, N.I.L, all this movement in college basketball, are there still going to be blue bloods in a few years, or is the parity in this game going to overtake that?
Well, I think, the quote-unquote blue bloods are the schools that have been there forever. And really, who do you put in there? You put KU, North Carolina, Duke, Kentucky. I mean, and then where do you go from there? Is Michigan State still a quote-unquote blue blood? I don't know that you can really say that they are, and Kentucky hasn't won anything in a decade. So you could argue that parity is already here. And you could argue that, you look at some of the recent struggles, if you will, of North Carolina and even Duke at times. But they're right. They're going to be right there every year. NIL is going to have a big role in that. If they don't get control of that, that plays a major role. But blue blood or not, I don't think it really has that much bearing, not near as much bearing, if you will, on recruiting. Kids are going to go where they can get paid. Those that are ready for the NBA are going to be there 1 year and move on. I think what's going to be harder to do is to say we built a program, to try to build a program from scratch, or to say, oh, we have a great like Oklahoma State. We've got a bunch of young, good players. They just need time. Well, they're not going to get it. Those kids are going to get frustrated. They're going to go somewhere where they want to win. They're going to be 1 year and gone. You just don't have the time to build a program like you used to because the kids are just too transient.
So we kind of know the top four for KU. Is Johnny Furphy, how entrenched do you think he is in the starting lineup? What is his ceiling this season moving forward? And do you think overall Bill Self has found the right mix and the right rotations?
Well, I think he had definitely found the right mix and rotation. It wasn't for a lack of trying. I think coming into the year, I've been a believer that Furphy would be the difference maker. Now, to what level that takes KU, who knows? You could argue that right now behind Hunter Dickinson, he's the most consistent offensive performer in terms of being able to knock down a shot, finish on the break. Now, he's not Kevin McCullough defensively. He's not Kevin McCullough from a toughness and intangible-wise because he just isn't. He doesn't have that experience. But in terms of making a shot, making winning plays, rebounding on both ends, the only thing that holds him back is just learning how to defend, the smaller player without using his hands and still playing to his strength, which is being 6'9" and long. I love the kid. I hate to think that this is our only shot of having him this 1 year, but there's a lot of draft boards out there that are starting to list him, and that's unfortunate.
Well, and KU's 5-3, not terrible, but we're not used to seeing KU have 3 losses this early in the season. Where do you see KU right now as a team? Are they going to get better? Is it just Big 12? But where do you see KU? Where maybe they're struggling a little bit, where they're strong?
Well, it's a great question, and I think depending on the day and where you want to come at it, there isn't really one answer because, in general, they're scoring the basketball okay. The games that they've lost, unfortunately, 2 of them they should not have lost, and that's something the Bill Self teams traditionally don't do. Traditionally, they go to Central Florida, and when they're up 16, they're going to win that game. But we turned it over and let them back into the game, and I think lack of depth plays a little bit into that, maybe fatigue. This team, generally a Bill Self team, would not go and lose to a somewhat depleted West Virginia team. And so what that does is puts a whole lot more pressure on having to go on the road to a Baylor or a Houston or those types of teams and steal some wins, and then obviously you've got to hold serve at home. If you go player by player, would I trade our 5 guys for 5 guys or anybody on anybody else's team? No, I wouldn't. I think we've got a great 5 players, if you will. When they play smart, when they take care of the ball, we're getting nothing off the bench. If we're going to do anything postseason, one would think we've got to get some sort of production out of Elmarco Jackson. Bill is still, and although I probably wouldn't tell you otherwise, Bill is very high in private conversations on Nick Timberlake. He feels like he's right there, ready to make a kind of a breakout, if you will. But if you look around college basketball, and we say this, I've been saying this for several years, and so have others, it's nobody's perfect. Everybody's got problems. The question is, what are you lacking on a given night, and do you have guys that can make up for it with toughness, with rebounding, with the intangibles? And unfortunately, the Jayhawks had those 2 games where nobody did, and it's put a lot of pressure on the remaining part of the schedule as it gets a little bit tougher. That you can't have any more slip-ups, or it's going to be a big road to hoe.
Jeff Gueldner, our guest from the KU television network. So let's get back to this Houston game because it's probably it's got to be the most intriguing game of the weekend. Houston is giving up 53 points per game. You almost have to blink to make sure you're right on that. Their opponents are shooting 35.5%, just 28% from the three-point line. They have an unbelievably talented set of guards on both ends of the court. What are you expecting? What's KU going to do to try to combat this relentless defense that Kelvin Sampson's going to throw at them?
Well, if you look across college basketball, I won't be too long-winded here. Offense is not easy to find all the time. There are way too many games in the 50s and 60s because kids are taking bad shots. You don't have as many good shooters, and the defense has gotten a lot better. And there's a lot of inconsistencies, if you will, in how the game is being called. But I'll take Hunter Dickinson scoring the basketball against about anybody in terms of 7'2". Now they've got some long athletes, and that typically gives him problems. So how you score, you get out in transition, you score early, you move the basketball. Iowa State was only giving up 51, 52 points at home all year, and we went in there and gave them 75. The problem was they scored 80. So the bigger concern with us, for me anyway, is not so much can we score enough points, as can we stop them, and how often does our poor offense, meaning a turnover or an ill-advised shot, turn into an easy run out for the other team. And then obviously you hope that you don't have, the injury with McCullough, we'll see. You don't have foul trouble, that kind of a thing, because there's just not a lot of depth to go to. But, Houston plays tough, and that's kind of the staple of the Big 12 right now. You've got a lot of teams that can guard, and you're going to have to knock down some shots when you're open because the opportunities aren't going to be very plenty.
Well, it's going to be a heck of a game. 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon up at Allen Fieldhouse, Houston and Kansas. All right. Thank you, Jeff. We always appreciate your time.
No problem. You guys have a good day. Thank you.
How powerful is Cox Fiber? Powerful enough to keep fans across the country in the action on the biggest game days of the year. Whether you're one of 65,000 fans at Allegiant Stadium or you're streaming the game at home with Cox Fiber from the company with America's fastest download speeds. Whenever it matters most, Cox keeps you connected. Limited availability in select areas. Speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms and other restrictions may apply. Analysis by Ookla of Speed Test Intelligence data. Fixed median download speeds US Q3 2023.